Hello. Welcome back if you were here before. So we had a little glitch, but it's all good. We're re-recording. So hopefully the recorded button is on, and I'm going to keep an eye on that to make sure it stays recording. All right, so we are going to be talking about sight words today, what they are, what they aren't, what to do with them. And then we're going to have question and answer. So we'll talk about, go through kind of the PowerPoint presentation. I'll show you some demonstrations of some activities, and then we will, at the end, save time for questions. So you can submit questions I think it's on the bottom of your screen, so it's on the bottom of my screen, and then I will make sure I go over all of them and answer them. So this should, the presentation part will last about an hour, and then we can ask as many questions as we can get through in the half an hour. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so this presentation is called The Usual Suspects, and switch this over, sorry. Okay, I just want to make sure. Catherine, can you see? What do you see on the screen? I see just you, and it says recording. Okay. So when I do this, do you see the presentation? No. Okay, so I have to share the screen. Okay, let me find the. All right, get ourselves all set up. Okay, so going to share our PowerPoint. Okay, there we go, that's working. All right, after last time, a little paranoid. So, okay, so this is called The Usual Suspects, rule-breaking sight words and how to teach them. So the main thing I just want to discuss is what sight words are and what they mean, and everyone has different definitions. But before we start that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about what I do and who I am. And so we have learning centers. So we have Syllables Learning Centers, and that's how this all started. Was OG tutoring, and so we do online OG tutoring all over the world, actually. And then we also have Kendore Learning, which has two parts. One part is all of our materials, so it's the games and activities that we've made over the years, in the classroom and in tutoring sessions, and trying to make learning a little bit more fun for kids who struggle. So that's our online store that has books and games and materials and things like that. And then also we have professional development and teacher training. So we are an accredited IDA and INSTRUCT training site. So we go out and train teachers. We have an online training that we do twice a year. Plus we do professional development on anything related to reading. So, and we've been doing it for 20 years. So Syllables and Kendore have been around unbelievably for that long. So let's talk about sight words. All right, so the history of sight words. Basically, the list that most people think of when they think of sight words are fry words and dolch words. And the fry word list was first published in 1957. It's 1,000 most frequent words that he actually went through all the reading material in his school, like grades 3 through 9, and counted the words. I can't even imagine doing that without computers. And the dolch sight word list, which was first published in 1928, started with initially 250 words K through 2. So both of these men believe that we had to memorize these words because they were so highly frequent. And that's what a lot of schools still do to this day, is they just say, you're going to have to do the first 100 words, and then the second 100 words, and the third 100 words, and keep going until you have them all memorized, which in my opinion is really inefficient. I actually was in a restaurant with a friend, and I overheard the table next to us. I heard this mom saying, oh my goodness, I'm so proud of him. We got through 1,000 sight words this year. And I kind of laughed because, you know, you need to have a good 60,000 words in your working vocabulary to make it through college. So, you know, if this kid's in first grade, I'm like, you got through 1,000 words, you only have 59,000 more to go. He's going to hate you and not want to go to college. But because I think there's a much easier way to teach these that kids will get a greater benefit from, and make it a lot easier for teachers to get this material across. So first, what are they called? Sight words, high frequency words, or automatic words? I honestly don't really care about that, because we all know what those words are. You need to know them by sight. You need to know them automatically. They are high frequency. So I think we kind of are splitting hairs a little bit when we get too upset about what they are called. So, you know, we have to have them memorized. You know, they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're going to be on, you know, billboards and every book and every page of text we're ever going to see. They make up greater than 60% of all text. So if you don't know these words quickly and efficiently, then it's going to really slow down your reading, and it's going to, you know, impact your comprehension. So they have to be recognized instantly. So I use Kilpatrick's definition, which is sight words are words that are instantly recognized from memory, regardless of whether they are phonetically regular or irregular. So I think the problem really comes into play when we're talking about phonetically regular or irregular. So, and there's a lot of, I think there should be more debate over what's regular and irregular than over whether we call them sight words or high frequency words or automatic words. And I'm going to explain why. So since sight words need to be instantly recognized from memory, whether they are phonetically regular or irregular, we need to know a little bit more about those words, right? So phonetic words are learned more easily than non-phonetic words, which makes total sense, because it's a lot easier to sound out the word sad than it is to deal with the word said, right? So it's usually, you know, but the average kid is going to need like maybe 5 to 7 repetitions, you know, or sometimes less of phonetic words. Your kids who struggle a little bit more are going to have a harder time with blending and with acquiring the sounds and, you know, the phonological awareness precursors, but still phonetic words will be easier for them, even if they are dyslexic, than the non-phonetic words. Now, concrete words are learned more easily than abstract words. And that also makes a lot of sense, because if the kid can anchor to the definition of a word and understands the definition of a word, then it's going to be easier for them to hold on to that word. If a word is abstract, then, and it has an abstract meaning, then it's going to be much more difficult for a kid to remember that word because the term was abstract. So a lot of this has to do with vocabulary. So the fact that they're phonetic means you're going to be able to learn them quicker and easier, but there's a big difference between a concrete and an abstract word in the amount of repetition a kid is going to need to be able to understand not only the word, but the meaning. Because why memorize a word if you have no idea what it means? That's kind of silly, right? So this is kind of the breakdown of that. So if you have the whole group of sight words, they would include your, you know, phonetic, non-phonetic, or if you want to say like regular and irregular, you know, for the orthography. And so that orthography is the spelling. I know I have people of different levels that look at these webinars. So, you know, some people might understand what orthography is and some people don't. But orthography is that spelling of what the word, you know, how it's spelled. And then the phonetic component is going to be, you know, the sound symbol relationship and how they pair up next to one another. So if it's phonetic, the sounds match the symbols. It's super easy because we have a one-to-one kind of correspondence, and it makes it a lot easier. Now, non-phonetic, there's still a sound symbol correspondence, but it may not be common, right? So it may be a pattern though. So it may be a sub pattern. It may have some, historical reasons behind it. There's a lot of things that we can do to make those non-phonetic words maybe a little bit easier for kids to anchor to. Now, if you look at that phonetic sight word component, it's gonna be two different categories. Would be concrete, so it's a car. Kids know what cars are. It's going to be a lot easier for them to figure out what that word is and sound it out and then remember it, because you have all those components going on in your brain of not just anchoring to the orthography, just looking at it and memorizing, but also you have meaning, and meaning is the construct that really holds things in your long-term memory. Something that's abstract, it's a lot easier to hold, let's say, a sentence where it's like the cat ran down the hill and bit the dog, and not a string of random digits, even though they may be the same amount of information, but there's nothing concrete that you can hold on to help you to remember it. So abstract would be words that tend to be more abstract in their meaning, and a lot of these also have multiple meanings. So when kids are trying to struggle to, if I said I'm going to help you, what does help mean? Most kids use help in the definition of help. So if I said, what does help mean? They'll say, well, it's to help somebody. So you have to be more specific about the meaning of these words, use them in sentences, make sure they understand, the usage, that it could be a noun, that could be a verb. You can help somebody, but you can also, give help, or be the help, right? So if it's non-phonetic or irregular, that's the same exact thing. So if it's concrete, then like the word eyes, which is, irregularly spelled, you still understand the meaning. If they understand you have two eyes, kids learn that pretty early. Now the abstract ones are going to be like from and was, and those are very hard to define. Our function words are very hard to define, like of, of. If you say, what does of mean, or what does do mean, kids typically will use the word in the definition. So it's like to do something, that's what do means. Or of, it's like when something's made of something. So those really short function words can be troublesome, and they tend to be irregular. Okay, so what I do is I think we should sort these words, because sorting them, putting things into categories, makes it easier to teach, because then kids can look at them and compartmentalize them. When you look at just a random list of words like the Fry list or the Dolch list, the words are just totally based on frequency, and you're going to have it next to was. Well, you can sound it out, and wouldn't it be better to put the sight words that all have it in them in the it lesson? And so some people argue about, well, that's going to rearrange the frequency. Well, the reality is a week one way or the other isn't going to matter, learning the spelling of these words, and it's going to make it way more efficient to learn 10 to 15 words that are phonetically regular with that concept that you're learning than it would be to try to memorize the concept plus flashcards of all these sight words. And we know that you kind of store these in different places depending on whether they're phonetic or they're kind of more like a picture that you have to memorize, because like the word have or said, that is going to have to be a mental image, because you're going to have to be able to recall it on demand. So it's like an MOI, mental orthographic image, or just the orthography of the word, however you want to whatever you want to call it. What it means is that on demand, when I want to spell the word was, I don't have to stop and think about how to spell it. It's already in my head, because I can't sound it out. I can't go, oh, was, what, that's not going to work, because it's not going to have a one-to-one correspondence. I'm going to have that picture stored away in my head. Okay, now I want to show you the way that I sort these words. And if you look to the left, I will sort phonetic, which is versus non-phonetic or irregular words from each other. Okay, now the thing about this is that it's dependent upon what has been taught. So if you look at the list below, if I'm teaching the sound and that letter U, and I would be putting it together with the consonants that I've taught, and then we're blending CVC, then the words that I would introduce with that would be the phonetic sight words: but, much, run, such, sun, up, us. And we would be focusing on knowing what those words mean, because those are the most important, words, because of frequency, that they need to understand them. Most kids do understand them. They can use them in a sentence. We would practice using them in a sentence. We would practice using them correctly. We would, if they have multiple meanings, we would talk about the multiple meanings of the words so that we could compare between nouns and verbs and using them differently in sentences. But we would probably do this all orally, because we wouldn't expect that they know how to spell all the words that they would use orally, right? So we would talk about, how would you use this in a sentence? I want to see if you can use it correctly. How would you use it as a noun? How would you use it as a verb? And you can have different kids if you're in a classroom, or you can take turns with the kid if you're doing one-on-one or small group. I love doing this in small group or large group, because it is hard for you to learn a word from yourself that you do not know, right? So if you don't know the meaning of the word and you don't know how to use the word, then maybe somebody else in your classroom does. And when you hear it from them, then you say, oh, I understand that. I've heard that before. And then you can activate that prior knowledge. And it gives you an opportunity to hear. You might say, oh, is that it? Could that be a noun and a verb? And you might say no, but the other kid is like, oh, it could be both. And then they use it as both a noun and a verb. Like the word book is on the screen, and that could be a noun or a verb. So you could buy a book. You could book a hotel for your vacation. So one is a noun and one is a verb. And just because some of these words are highly frequent, not all the meanings of them are highly frequent. And most monosyllabic words have more than one meaning. So this is a really good thing to bring up with kids to help them to anchor to it, because that meaning is it's the most important thing. Now, I only introduce like 2 or 3 or 4, depending on the pattern, of what I call criminal words, are rule breakers. So there's something about that word that is breaking the rules. And when those words are breaking rules, then we're going to have to think about those differently. Okay, so you see the word been, right? I say been. Other parts of the country say been, like it's been a long day. I say it's been a long day, but I do not say it's been a long day, right? So there are, countries like England that says been. If it said been here, it would not be irregular. It would be totally phonetic. It had the vowel team EE, then we would be able to use it, and that would be the end of that. Now, the word have actually is phonetic, but it's not phonetic right now, okay? So words being phonetic versus irregular just means that there is a rule that that governs that word, so you can sound it out. You can figure it out without having to completely memorize it, right? So the word have will be phonetic when we learn that words in English aren't allowed to end in V. So if I were teaching this to a kindergartner, they're going to need to have the word have in their writing and in their oral vocabulary before I'm going to teach them that words in English don't end in V. So right now it's criminal, and it's going to go on our criminal word wall, and it'll stay there until we learn the rule that words in English don't end in V, and then it'll be free from timeout. It learned its lesson. It gets to get off the wall, because now we don't have to look up to that wall to try to get the orthography of these words that are irregular. And then there's the word said, which isn't ever going to be regular. So it's just one that's going to stay on the criminal word wall. Right? Now, if you look at the 4th column, those are real words that have that vowel that I'm targeting. So if I'm targeting these are all words that have in them. If they're bold, they're in the first 400 to 600 most frequent words. If they're italicized, they're in the 600 to 2000 most frequent words. And they have been divided into 3 tiers, and those tiers are based on meaning and how frequent or how likely it is that kids would know the meaning of that word. Now, granted, this is my interpretation, so you may disagree, or you may be in a part of the country where you're going to use words more frequently than, maybe, you guys, wherever you live, you're gushing over people more frequently than I am. But I would think that kids would be more familiar with the word bug, right, than they would some or thus. Okay? So sometimes things are frequent, but not necessarily frequent for a little kid, like thus. But so I would use these for vocabulary as well. So I could develop vocabulary. If they knew all those phonetic sight word meanings, then I would work on the meanings of a lot of these other words and do those, grammar activities where which one's a noun, which one's a verb, which one's both, which one's a noun, verb, and adjective, and do oral wordplay with those so they can practice usage. And I like to use oral punctuation, and I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but oral punctuation is when you have, kids doing oral sentences, you would have them do a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence and a period at the end, which would be "er." So if you said, can you use the word run in a sentence? I like to run with my friends. "Er." And you can start getting them into doing questions and exclamations. So it would be, do you like to run with your friends? And that would be your question mark. So on my YouTube channel, there's a video with some of those signals if you're interested in it. And Whole Brain Teaching does a lot of it. And there's several different people. It's been around like since the 50s. So most of you are probably familiar with it. But it's a great way to get kids to use oral language to create grammatically correct sentences. And so, in front of their friends and in practice where they don't have the pressure of having to spell everything and write it all down. Okay. So, if a kid wants to say, John can run as fast as a Tyrannosaurus Rex, he doesn't have to worry about having to spell that, even though he definitely knows what the meaning of it is. So I would incorporate that in with this because that usage is so important. So we would be doing reading, we would be doing spelling, we would be doing analysis of this and usage. Okay. So if you notice, I do the same thing. I have do and to. They sound similar. I wouldn't put do and to with the lesson because that would be confusing, that they might think that it said And so I put it in with the lesson, and then the phonetic sight words there are going to be big, bit, did, him, if, in, it, sit, this, which, and wish. Wish and with, out of order. And then work on some of that other vocabulary. Okay, so teaching sight words. When you have your irregular words, these are some ways that you can sort them. The first way is morphology or etymology. So like the history of the word, the story behind how things evolved, and giving them other words to anchor to help them to remember it. Because if I'm looking at the word one and I have that ON means one. And you want them to see that relationship in other words. So you could say, look at this word only. You may not be teaching them to spell only, but you could put it on the board next to it and say, this is only, like, can you use the only in the sentence? They probably know that word because they would say, Mom, can I have cookies? And then she would say, you can have only one. And they would start to realize, oh, okay, that means one, right? And then you have once. You can only go get a cookie once, right? They might know once upon a time. They're going to know these words orally. So what you're saying is, here's a way of looking at the morphology, the meaning of parts of these words, and the history of some of these words. And once and only are sight words. They're just not in the first, 200 or 300. They're going to be a little bit further down the line, but why can't we just teach them all together? Because the meaning is linked together. And that way we're creating fabric so that the kids can hold on to it. Because when you just give them like one thing after another on a flashcard, one, they start to hate it. Two, they need excessive repetition, and that makes it difficult. Okay, so then there's alone, which means there's one person's going to be there, and you can write these on the board. You can underline, the ON part, make sure that they understand that it means one. And then there's a great video that I love on YouTube, and it's Gina Cook, and it's called Making Sense of Spelling. So she's got some great videos, like 3 or 4 of them that I absolutely love. And it talks about an onion and how an onion means one, and it has one bulb, and that's kind of where it came from. And I think it's good to show kids these things because it opens up their mind to the possibility that these words have connections to other words. And when you know that there is the possibility of that occurring, it makes you stop thinking, you're going to stop thinking that sight words are random, that you could look at these words and go, well, maybe that has a relationship with this other word that I already know. And that's why, as educators, we're always told, activate prior knowledge, because if you have something to anchor it to, it's going to stick more readily. Okay, and so that is really important when it comes to meaning. And then the spelling, that visual component, for the irregular ones, it's going to be like a little bit more about meaning and analysis. So we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so then submorphemes. And so submorphemes are parts of a word that the meaning contributes to the whole. Okay, so you might have like just a consonant blend like TW. You know, if we're looking at ON, that could be a submorpheme, but it goes across different words for different reason, but the morphology is still the point. So submorpheme is, you know, that TW, when it's in a word, it means two. So if you see a word with TW, then it's going to reference two. This is going to help you to differentiate the word TWO from the word TOO and the word TO. Instead of just constantly having that repetition making the difference, right? Because we've got kids who constantly have the confusion between these, and we think they need just more repetition, but maybe they need a little bit of meaning so they can anchor to it and they can figure out from another word they already know, because they might be a twin, right? So if they're a twin and they know that means two, then they know that they have TW, which one of the twos means two, the number two, then it's going to be TWO, right? It still doesn't say TWO, so it's not really helping them out phonetically, but it is going to help them to, you know, categorize these highly frequent words and do it more quickly so you can spend more time on other things. And the word 12 is also a TW word, and 20 and twist and twine, and there's quite a few of them that refer back to the meaning of two. Right? There's also advanced phonics. So you can look at your advanced phonics concepts and say, what am I going to be teaching later, right? So words in English do not end in the letter V. So that's because if we hear the V sound at the end, then we are going to have to add an E to the end. So if you had have, it was not phonetic because everybody thinks it should be have, which it's not. But why is that E there? That's why people go, oh, English is crazy. But it's not crazy. It's just a lot of us don't know the reasons behind it. So we call it crazy because that's all we know. So then if we have, now it's totally phonetic. It gets out of jail. It no longer is on the criminal word wall. It's been released, good behavior, knows what it's supposed to be doing. And so we don't have to worry about it anymore. We can compare it to a word like live, right? So if we have live could be live or live, because it could be that bridge E, the E that jumps over and makes the I say its name, or it could just be that the E has to be there because it ends in V. And either way, we would have to use context to figure out whether it was live or live, okay? Have can only be have. And the reason is have is not a word. So if have were a word, then that would work. But since it's not, it's just have. Okay, that seems to confuse a lot of people. They're like, but it could be have. I'm like, no, it can't, because it's not a word. But if you want to invent something, you can call it a have, and then we will have an issue there. Okay, then there's leave, same reason. We are going to have that E at the end because we have, and we can put that in there. So have and live and leave are all going to be somewhere in that high frequency list. So if you want to take the words and chunk them into categories, you can do this. And then it's going to be so much faster and easier than doing one word at a time, or 100 words at a time with flashcards that you send home to parents that they just have to drill. It's going to cut the amount of drill that's necessary and give you way more time to do other things. Okay. And to be honest, I started out my career with older kids. I started teaching high school. My background initially was high school kids with behavior disorders and learning disabilities. And they couldn't read, but I can tell you they knew all their sight words. So they had seen them so many times by the time they got to high school that they were sight words for them. They just couldn't do anything else. So they had memorized them. So most kids, given enough time, they're going to see these words anyway, right? So, and they're going to learn them anyway, because when I started working with adults who were illiterate, they all knew these words too, because they're so frequent, right? But if we can get this into kids' brains faster, then we can move on to other things, because unfortunately in most schools, reading is taught kindergarten, first grade, and sometimes second grade. And then after that, we expect them to be, you know, reading to learn instead of learning to read, which is like one of my least favorite phrases. We teach math from K to 12, and we teach reading for K and 1 and sometimes 2, right? And then by the time they're out of second grade, you know, sometimes they're 7, 8 years old, and we've already given up on them, teaching them how to read. And there's so much more to learn about our language that would benefit every kid, in their spelling, in their reading comprehension, in their writing, that I think we should be teaching it all the way through high school. But, you know, we got to start somewhere. At least we can start doing it well in the lower grades. Okay, so the first step would be, when we're going to introduce a sight word, we are going to instruct them in what the word is. We would put it up on the board, we would talk about it, we would say, here's the meaning, here's the rule, if there is a rule, if there isn't a rule, this is what we're going to have to, you know, figure out about it. We're going to talk about the part of speech. Can we use it as a noun? Can we use it as a verb? Is it an adjective? And demonstrate that for them. So a lot of times teachers will also say, kids don't know their parts of speech. And the reason they don't know their parts of speech is because we try to teach it as a higher level construct instead of starting at what they know, right? So let's use it orally. Let's talk about it. They do know the parts of speech, or they wouldn't be able to construct sentences. They wouldn't be able to say, may I go to the bathroom? They wouldn't be able to say, I want a cookie. So they do understand the construct of our language. They do understand, you know, prepositions and nouns and verbs and adjectives, because they use them all the time in their oral language. So if we can start with the oral language and then put the label on top of something they already know, that's taking advantage of their prior knowledge and activating it. And it's going to make all of our instruction stick, right? So this is what the criminal word wall looks like. So what I do is, as I teach a word at that lesson, I will put it up on the wall. I am never, ever going to have all these words on the wall at the beginning of the year, because this would be like looking at Greek to them if they didn't know what these words were. So if I teach 2 words, those 2 words will be up. Then the next week, if we're doing 2 more words or 3 words, then they're going to go up. So as they accumulate these words over time, that's when you're going to start adding them to the board, so that they know that they can go up and look for it, and help them with any parts of the word that's causing them problems. Okay, so when I do my vowels, my vowel wall is totally different. It's done by the vowel sound, so most likely the medial sound, because it's going to be sorted by all the vowels. But with the criminal word wall, you know, most of the time, and I know there are always going to be times when that is, you know, not the case, but most of the time the vowel is the problem and the initial consonant is not. So this way they could go up and find the initial consonant, and then they can find the word they want to use to put in here. I have experimented with a couple different ways of doing this, of having these done by the vowel sound, you know, but I found that the initial consonant seems to work best for kids being able to find it. And then when I do my phonetic word wall, it's done by a vowel sound, okay, and that's in what, you know, we have our vowel valley. And then they will have the phonetic sight words for kindergarten on that wall. But you don't want to put all these up at once. If you're, you know, don't like the word criminal, you can call it timeout. You can call it whatever you want. All we're trying to do is to put them separate from phonetic words, so that if kids are having difficulty, they can look over here, because these are the words that they're going to use most commonly in their writing, especially when they're really young. Okay, so we're going to talk about grapheme mapping, because grapheme mapping is a great way to look at the criminal words, analyze their component parts, and then point out to the kids where they are, what part is irregular. So if I had a phonetic word like I have for cat up here, if I wanted to say there how many sounds are there in cat, I would bubble in 3 dots because it would be k, at, I would have 3 sounds. Then I would go back and put in, because those dots represent the phonemes, the next thing I would do is go back in and put the graphemes, which are the letters that represent those sounds, and 1 per box. So you're probably familiar with acronym boxes, sound boxes, whatever you want to call it. I call it dot and jot, but I just like that. So I always dot first and then go back in and jot. And that's where I think the way that I do it is a little bit different. I've never seen anyone who does the dots first and then they go back in and put the graphemes in. So this way you can analyze the irregular spelling, because most of the time there's only one part of the word that's irregular, and you don't have to like stress out about the whole word. You just have to know which part of it that you really have to memorize. And honestly, typically it's the vowel. Okay, so if I, this is, you know, also depending on, and that's the thing in reading education, there's a lot of different terms that mean the same thing. So it's orthographic mapping, which means you're mapping the spelling of the word, right? But I call it dot and jot, which just means phoneme to grapheme mapping. The dot represents the sound, the jot represents the grapheme, which are the letters. And so you might hear different terminology, but we just call it dot and jot. Okay, so if I had the word said over here, if I was teaching said, then what would happen is I would have to have it written for the kids to analyze. So I might put this up on the board just like this. I would write, like, maybe we're going to work on said, been, and to. And those are the 3 words that we're working on this week. And then I would say, okay, we're going to analyze it because these are criminal words. There's some part of these words that are breaking the rules. So we would say, how many sounds do you hear in said? So then if you go to the dots, you would say, right? And you've got 3 dots. Now you have to go back in and put in the sounds. You know, where the sounds you already marked, you have to put in the spellings that represent those sounds. So our first thing that goes in here is going to be our S, because it's, then we have the, it's totally phonetic, right? And then the I part, that's breaking the rule. Okay, so I'm not trying to write like a 5-year-old. This pen is just really hard to write with. So I'm actually trying to write neatly. Last time the same thing happened. I should have practiced. Okay, so this just came with my new computer, very handy. So if I have said, what part of it is breaking the rules? It's going to be that AI, because we would think it would be an E, because then would be right? But it's not. So with this is the way we analyze it. Now if we go do, if we do Ben, I would go B, those are my 3 sounds. Now I have to go back in and say, okay, well, what goes where? The B to be pretty logical, right? That yeah, we can hear the so maybe this should go here. Okay, and then we have to mark that it's rocking the boat, making waves, causing problems, breaking the rules, whatever you want to say. But I put a little squiggly under it so we know what's causing that problem. Then if you say bean, honestly, it's been a long day, then you wouldn't even need to put it there. And I go all over the place, and its dialect is different. You know, I live in Atlanta. When I go to South Atlanta, there's a lot of Southern accents, and I just have to say, okay, well, this is the way you say it. This is the way I say it. Let's talk about, you know, mapping from the sound you say to the sound I say. And I've had some discussions where I say the word then, and it sounds totally phonetic to me, you know, so, you know, then. And, but the people that I was working with, the whole group were like, no, we say then we're going. And so it made it a non-phonetic word, because they basically are saying with an I, and I'm saying it with an E, right? The if versus the F. So, but the spelling is THEN. So my pronunciation is phonetic. Theirs would be considered not phonetic. So it may vary depending on where you live. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that it's different, and you can address it, and you can talk about it, and you can map it the way that people say it. But don't map it incorrectly, you know. So if they, you know, just honor people's accents, you know. So, and we wouldn't want to say, oh, said said. That would kind of be weird. All right, so if we were going to do two, then we would go two. All right, we've got two sounds. We put the T in there, the O goes here, and that's the one that's making waves. And you can do this all the way through with, I do it with phonetic and criminal words, but it's a really, really good strategy for the criminal words because you're going to see where the breakdown occurs. And especially when you get to like those O-U-G-H ones, because if I did though, I have two sounds, right? And then I do O. This is going to be hard. Let's see if I can do it. Oops. O-U-G-H. It's hard to get four things in there on the screen. So, but that would be how that would go in there. And then kids can get the sense of how the sound isn't matching with the number of the letters, because sometimes they're like, that's really long, but it sounds really short. And this way it helps them with analysis, and they should be looking at it as they're doing it. So this is orthographic mapping, also known as dot and jot. Okay. Another big thing for me is have fun. So you should always try to have fun with kids, because the more fun you have, the easier it's going to be for them to hold on to it. Because if they can't hold on to it, then they're not going to retain it. You know, they're not going to be able to remember it for, you know, the next day, right? So they learn it, they regurgitate it, and then they can't hold on to it, right? So if you're working with kids and they need extra repetition, then making it fun is going to make it stick. So we all know if you like doing something that you're going to want to continue to do it, and if you don't like doing something, you don't want to continue to do it. And if they're always checking out the time and not sure about what, you know, or not sure, or they're not having fun, then that's going to, just getting my supplies ready, impact their level of retention. So let me switch my screen for a second, and I'm going to show you these activities so you can see. Okay, so if we're going to do some dictation, then we're going to do maybe sand or beads or you know, whatever medium that you like to use. But so if kids need lots of repetition, I try to like mix it up so they get some different opportunities. But if I'm working on the word said, then what I would do with them is I would have, you know, gone over the word, talked about the usage, like I said, then, you know, instructed them in it, used it in a sentence, practiced, you know, word, you know, the word meaning. Then I would have modeled the phoneme mapping strategy and looked at the orthographic structure of it. And then I would start saying, okay, well, let's see if we can write it in our tray, right? So if we had to memorize it, then we would want to say the names of the letters and not the sounds, because the sounds aren't going to line up. So if I said, write the word said, then they would have to go S-A-I-D spells said, right? Then shake it up. Maybe we're going to do to. I'm going to the store. T-O spells to, right? Do you like to dance, right? D-O spells do. And that way they're getting opportunities to review, but it's also tactile. They also, you know, tend to enjoy it a lot more than just constantly doing paper pencil tasks. And it gives them kinesthetic practice. Okay, so tactile and kinesthetic practice. So then another thing I would do for repetition is, this is, I call it our criminal word book. So with our criminal word book, what we do is we would make copies of the words we're working on. And so if we're working on the word said, then we put the red grid underneath it, and you want to make sure that your paper is tilted. So I tilt, because I tilt it to the right because I am left-handed. So if you were right-handed, you would tilt this direction, because the whole point is to, when you're writing, the paper moves, not your writing hand. So you don't want the paper straight up and down, because that's going to encourage kids like turning their hand like this, and then that stresses all the muscles going all the way up to their neck. So if I were writing as a left-handed person, then I would turn it this way, and I would have them trace over on top of the grid with a crayon. And I use red crayons because these are my red criminal words, because we need to stop. We can't sound them out. So we want to reinforce that. So I would go S-A-I-D, spells said. And I always have the kids do it twice. S-A-I-D, spells said. Now I want them to say it out loud. They don't have to say it super loud, but you want to get that auditory reinforcement so that they're hearing it, and also so you know that they're doing it, you know, that they're saying it, because in their head, who knows what they're doing. So when you use your finger, you want to see if you've gathered any evidence, and you'll be able to feel a tactile letter left behind by the crayon. So we would want them to trace over it while saying S-A-I-D, spell said. Then I have them switch over to a pencil. Of course, I'm using a pen, which I wouldn't allow, but and we don't need the grid under it, but then we're going to do the same thing, S-A-I-D, spell said. And we would do that 3 times so that we're trying to develop some motor memory for these. You don't want to do it like 50 to 100 times or whatever, like they used to make me do in elementary school. Because really after a while, you don't even recognize what it is that you're writing, because it's just become a blur. So this way we would have gone S-A-I-D, spell said, S-A-I-D, spell said 3 times. Then we have to fold it over, and we want to remember the scene of the crime, okay? Because up here we gathered evidence and we felt our tactile letter. Here we followed the trail of the letters and did that 3 times. Now we flip it over, we want to remember the scene of the crime, okay? And so if we are looking at this is too bright. Okay, then we have to go S-A-I-D. Then we get to fingerprint the criminal, and then write it again, S-A-I-D. And we can flip back and try to remember the scene of the crime if we forget. But what the fingerprinting allows is, one, you don't have to turn your paper. So sometimes people say, use your other finger, and then they end up going like this around it because they have to get around their other finger. Or they'll say, well, put your finger down, then lift it up, but the kids end up writing right on top of it because they had no way of keeping a visual reference. And the good thing about it is that kids love fingerprinting. It doesn't stay on your finger, it just wipes right off, and it doesn't dry out. So that way the kids can use it for like the whole year, and you only need like 1 thing per like table if you have a table of kids. But it makes them want to do the activity because they like the grid, they like the activities, they like being able to use fingerprinting. And so your kids who hate to write, if you make it fun, then they'll want to do it. And sometimes people are like, well, how do you teach reading with all this fun? And the reality is easier, because if you are having a good time, you want to continue doing it. And that's what's important, is you want kids to enjoy reading. Reading is one of the only skills out there that the more you like it, the more you're going to get from it, because the more you're going to do it, and you get smarter and your vocabulary grows, and you want to read on your own, and it's enjoyable. And so pairing reading or spelling activities with a punishment is discouraging reading. You know, if you say, oh, you have to read 20 minutes before you're allowed to go out with your mom and dad, or you go out and play with your friends, and mom and dad are like, we have to read right before bed when you're the most tired, that doesn't tend to make kids struggling readers especially want to read. So the another thing is you can do your dictation on Dot and Jot. So you can call out the words once you think they know them, then they have to go through and they would have to go d and count the number of sounds. And then this could be an assessment. So, you know, if they're struggling, you can say, watch out for that middle sound. It's rocking the boat, breaking the rules, and it's going to give them a clue of which ones that they may need to work on. And then you have work samples so that you can use it for assessment or progress monitoring or RTI or whatever it is that you might need for those kids. Okay. There's also fun card games, which I love because the kids beg to use them, and they when they beg to use them, then you get to say, oh, okay, if we get this done first. And one of the favorites that the kids have is called Cops and Criminals. And Cops and Criminals is where you have phonetic words are the cops, the good guy, and the criminals are the bad guys, and they break the rules. And so, you know, this would be a criminal word, and it's in red, and then you would have a cop word like book. So I just control the deck for what I've taught. And then the favorite game all around seems to be lineup, because it's where if you spell the word correctly, like if I have my cards in my hand and I have, you know, 7 cards, I would ask the person next to me, I'd say, green is my favorite color. And then they have to spell green. If they spell it correctly, then it goes in their lineup in front of them for everyone to see. And those are the cards that they have kind of won. And then if it were my turn and they were asking me to spell where, let's say I spelled it W-E-A-R, then they would put it in the discard pile and it would be out for everyone to see, so that if other people needed to refresh their memory, then it would be there the next time you went around. And then if you get any of the extra cards, like the jailbreak card or the criminal card or the cop card, there's different things that you can do. Like, so you can break someone out of jail. If you have a jailbreak card, then you can take somebody out of somebody else's lineup and add it to your lineup. And then whoever has the most cards in their lineup in the end wins. But it gives them good practice for usage and for spelling. And they like playing it. And there's a bunch of different games that you can play with it. And the other thing that I do with it is I will put them in my beach ball and toss it around, because all the cards fit in the beach ball. And then wherever their thumb hits, I usually say your left thumb, because that way you can learn your left from your right, because they always have problems with that. And then if they did that, they would go, okay, I've got 2. Then they'd have to use it correctly in a sentence. So I'm going to the store. So now, you know, the next person would have to spell it, because the way that they used it, it's going to be T-O, because they didn't say I have to buy 2 cans of soda, or will you go to the store too? You know, so it's about the usage that's going to drive that spelling. Okay, and so you can add new ones, take ones that are mastered out, toss them around. It gives the kids an opportunity to just have something that they get to touch and get to play with, which makes a big difference for kids when you're teaching them things that they have to memorize. Because the number one problem with sight words is not that people don't teach it. They do. They teach it. They just don't teach it to a point where it's automatic. And that's the problem. It doesn't generalize. And in order to get things to generalize and to get them to generalize quickly, you have to have a lot of repetition. And so if you want kids to get a lot of repetition without it being painful, then incorporating some fun into it is a good idea for everybody, because teachers, if the kids are having fun, you're more likely to like your students. Because if they're grouchy and complaining, you are probably also grouchy and complaining. So it's a win-win. Okay, so the next thing, did I go one more? Okay. The next thing is to track progress. And since I just said this, repetition is so important, you're going to have to make sure that you're monitoring. I always am looking for the lack of transfer into their writing, because a lot of kids get a spelling test right, they get their dot and jot right, they can do it when it's the only thing in their working memory, but when it comes time for them to write, and then all of a sudden they have to think about the whole sentence and capitalization and punctuation and the spelling of the words, then all of a sudden was is W-U-Z again. And so if you see in their writing that it's not transferring, that means they need more repetition. And it's going to be about like either frequency, like more frequent, over a longer duration, right? So we've got our, intervention. Do we need intensity? Do we need duration? What are we looking at? But I like to progress monitor them by keeping track of it on a grid where I can see what dates that they read them, and then what dates they missed, so that I can either work them back into their instruction and make sure that they know them well. And so one of the strategies that I use, I have an index card. So I would make a card for the words that they missed. So if they missed said, then on the front it would have the criminal word, and then on the back it would have read and spell, and then attempt and attempt. So this way I'm going to know whether they can read it, spell it, and what dates they attempted it. So if I have read, spell, attempt, attempt, so let's say today's 11/19, then I would ask them to spell said. They spelled it S-E-D. I would write S-E-D 11/19. If tomorrow they came back and I said, can you spell said? And they spelled it correctly, I would write at the top, spell 11/20. And I would want to make sure that they could spell it on 5 different instances, not the same day. So I want it over, a couple of weeks if I'm working one-on-one with kids. Now, if I can't work one-on-one with kids, then I'm going to have these cards, but only for my criminal words, sent home, because it's something parents can do, and parents can reinforce it, and you can have them work on those flashcards, so you can work on other things like saying, correctly. Or you can have the kids put it on their own chart and monitor progress. They love doing that. So they can check their own spelling tests on Friday and then write in their own box on that week whether they got those words correct. And they love that. They love seeing their graphs fill up. Okay. So these are the steps of sight word instruction. Sort, you want to sort them by phonetic property, non-phonetic, concrete, and abstract, so that you can go over those meanings with the amount of intensity they each deserve. You need to instruct them in what they mean and how to use them and the spelling, and then you need to do grapheme mapping so you can show them where they are irregular. A lot of these words, believe it or not, are not irregular. Okay, they may be less frequent spellings, but the language of origin is going to dictate the spelling. So a lot of times, some of these that we think are crazy are really they're just smaller clumps, right? So you can teach them all together, and that would be a good thing, okay? Makes it more efficient. Have fun, so, if you are stressed out, you have chemicals coming out from your amygdala that are going to impede retention. So if the kids are stressed and having a horrible time, it's making you less effective. So if you can have some fun, or at least, use some things. I know not everything's fun, but you can use it as an incentive. You're going to get more out of them, and then make sure you're tracking their progress. I can't tell you how many times when I go into schools, like a 5th grade teacher is like, oh, if the 4th grade teacher would have taught that, but the 4th grade teacher is like, oh, the 3rd grade teacher should have taught that, and it flows all the way down, right? Because everyone does teach it. We just aren't monitoring the progress to make sure it's staying in. Okay. I want to say thank you to our co-sponsors, the IDA of Georgia and Decoding Dyslexia, for helping us promote our event today. And thank you to everybody who showed up for it. Thank you for watching. So since you made it all the way through, which I appreciate, some of you twice. We've got a deal on our sight word bundle, which is a lot of the stuff that I showed you. The sight word trays, the one with the red who on there, that's just the criminal word quicksand that you mold into the words, and there's lots of different cards that have different words on them, and the kids can practice them. Plus they also have the phonetics that says UV of, so they can sound it out and do it on their own. We also are offering some spaces left in our online training that starts in February, so there's a coupon code for that. And then we would love it if you followed us on YouTube and Facebook, and hopefully we have some more things that you might find interesting on there. And now I am going to look at our questions and see what questions we have, and then I will answer those. So if anybody has any more questions, just type them up real quick, send them my way. Okay, so questions that I have. Catherine has been helping me and sending them over here for me. Okay. Oh, knocked it on the floor. Okay, when I was talking about the number 1, O-N-E, what about when you have like 1, like I won the game? Well, the way that I was talking about sorting, if you sorted like 1 and only and on and all of that, then what happens is you are helping them to be able to remember it by that morpheme instead of just rote memorization. And then if you have the word 1 and they understand what it means, they're not going to use O-N-E. They'll know that it's a different spelling. And then maybe you could take, you know, W-O-N and say 1, you're the winner, and talk about, you know, maybe some other way to anchor that into their memory, because you're going to have these things. That's why if you can clump them together, then you're going to have more success. If there's some type of morphological thread that you could pull through, like WR words, you could put those together, even though, you know, parts of them are still irregular. If you know that WR means to twist, and you have wring something out, or your wrist, or a wrench, then that's going to help kids to differentiate between the word right and the word right, like that is correct, or I'm going to turn right. But that morphological link is important. Okay, so should I teach things like the numbers together, like 1, 2, 3, 4? You can, like, the way you sort things is up to you. You know, I do it by, you know, the TW, because I would actually get a lot more words out of it by putting them together that way, and the 1, the ON. But I know that a lot of people do teach them all the numbers together so that they understand. But if you're doing the numbers orally and they understand the numbers from math, and you're saying, okay, take 3 crackers and put them out on the table, then, you know, the spelling of that, you know, 3 is pretty phonetic. Well, it is totally phonetic. So then you would only maybe have to talk about other words. But the number 4, F-O-U-R, is going to be different than F-O-R. But F-O-R is one of those function words that's pretty abstract. So if you said, you know, I'm going out for dinner, what does 4 mean? Kids are going to really hard time defining that. So you would talk about, this one means the number, and you know, this is that function word, and how would you use that function word, because most function words are 2 to 3 letters long, and the fact that when you have ones that are 4 letters, it tries to differentiate them for you by having that extra letter in there. Okay, so like O-R is a function word, but if you had O-A-R, that's more concrete, right? And O-R-E is also concrete, but O-R is more abstract. So that's the difference between a lot of those function words. They're abstract. Okay, certificate of attendance. That was emailed out to everybody today. So you just have to click on it, and there's a link in that email. And so you can print it out and then submit it if you get extra hours for, you know, MSLEC or ALTA or whatever your state requires as far as additional credits. Okay, let's see if we have any more. Okay. So, okay, so basically Fry and Dolch, I am not saying that they are not the most frequent words. They are the most frequent words. I'm just saying I disagree with the way that they have been sorted. So I think we can do a much better job sorting them, is all that I'm saying. So it's, if you have stuff for Fry and Dolch, then I would just rearrange it. You can easily look at your scope and sequence depending on what scope and sequence you use. So, you know, I use our scope and sequence. So I would go through and sort out the CVCs with, you know, first, and then I may get up to, you know, because in my list, which you saw, there were 600 in our, that I teach, in the first 600 scope and sequence. I'm pretty much hitting all those. If I have an advanced phonics rule, I might jump ahead to one that is in 1,000, but if I'm going to be teaching have the list, then maybe I'm going to pull some words that have that concept that are highly frequent so that they can learn those. But it's not that I'm not going to teach them words that aren't in the high frequency list, but at least I can pull the fry or Dolch words in with that pattern. The phoneme grapheme mapping, the thing about that is it is going to be dependent sometimes on what you've taught and what your pronunciation of things might be. So don't get too worked up about it. If it makes sense to you and your students, then go with it. There are sometimes things where people want to argue with me the way that I break them up, but it's if I have O, they're like, well, you made O-U-G-H the vowel. I'm like, well, that is the vowel. That's the sound for the vowel. And they're like, but you have GH in there, and those aren't vowels. And I'm like, well, I don't look at it that way. I look at it as, if this is the sound and this is how we're spelling it, then this is what's going to go in that box. So I don't subscribe to the A-E-I-O-U and sometimes Y theory. I do sound first. So if I hear, that sound, then how it's spelled, whether it's spelled I-G-H or O-U-G-H or whatever, that's going to go into the same box so that kids can, isolate it. Because it's the vowels that cause most of our problems. If you've, worked with kids over the years, you'll notice that, if they come across a word, like pumpkin, they're going to, if they don't know it, they're going to say, peanut, potato, paper, like they'll guess a bunch of things that start with, they don't start going zebra, orangutan, mushroom. They usually get those consonants down. It's because the vowels fluctuate depending on where they are in a word, and sometimes language of origin, or that based on that morphology, that those vowels cause the problem. And so just kind of raising their awareness to vowels, I think, is extraordinarily important. Then, okay, the last question I have is about the recording. So I think this has been recording the whole time, and I really honestly hope it has. But I won't know till I'm done. So once it is done recording, then we will put it up online, and then everybody will have access to it. Okay? Well, thank you so much for attending, and some of you more than once, and we'll talk to you soon. Oh, yeah, we have another one coming up in January, Dyslexia 101, so feel free to sign up for that. Thanks. Have a good night. Bye.